My name is Corinne Halsey. I am 60 years old. That morning, the hallway outside my apartment felt colder than usual. I had my coat half buttoned, a travel mug of coffee in one hand, keys in the other. The rain outside had started before dawn. Steady and whispering, the kind that made the whole city sound like it was thinking too loudly. When the elevator doors opened, Mrs. Caldwell was already inside. She lived one floor above me, tall for her age, always dressed like she had somewhere better to be. Her silver hair was wound tight at the back of her head, and her perfume lingered before she spoke. "Good morning, Mrs. Caldwell," I said. She smiled, thin and polite. "Good morning, Corinne." Her hand moved to press the button for the lobby, then stopped halfway. The doors began to close, and suddenly she caught them with the edge of her umbrella. "May I ask you something?" "Of course." Her voice dropped just enough to sound private. "Do you know who comes to your apartment every Thursday afternoon?" she asked, lowering her voice just enough to suggest unease. I blinked, thinking I had misheard. "I'm sorry." She tilted her head slightly, studying my face. "It's probably nothing. But I've seen someone using your door code, around 1 or 2. I assumed it was a cleaner or family, but you're usually gone at that hour." I laughed softly, more out of confusion than humor. "No, no one has a key but my husband and me." She said, and the word hung there. The elevator hummed, then stopped at the lobby. She gave a small smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Well, perhaps I'm mistaken. These buildings blur together." The doors opened, and she stepped out into the drizzle, leaving me inside with her words echoing in the metal walls. All day, the question trailed me from the grocery aisle to the evening dishes. When Michael came home, I told him what she'd said. He barely looked up from his phone. "You're taking her too seriously," he muttered. "You know how she is lonely, always watching." I nodded, but later that night, as the rain deepened and the lights flickered down the hallway, I found myself listening for the sound of a key turning in my own door. The next morning, I tried to laugh at myself. Mrs. Caldwell had probably seen a delivery person or someone from maintenance. Still, I walked slower down the hallway before unlocking my door, as if expecting to catch something in motion. Inside, everything looked ordinary, yet the air felt touched. I set my bag down and paused. There was a faint sweetness in the air, something floral and unfamiliar, nothing like the cedar candle I usually burned. I sniffed my sleeve, then the air again. The scent wasn't mine. When Michael came home that evening, I mentioned it lightly. "Do you smell that?" He glanced around, distracted. "Smell what perfume? Not mine." He shrugged. "Maybe it's from the hallway. Caldwell wears enough of it to perfume the whole floor." I forced a smile. "Maybe." After he went to shower, I walked through each room with the slow certainty of someone looking for her own reflection. The living room frame was slightly crooked, the curtain drawn 2 inches off from how I left it. The dresser drawer in the bedroom slid open with less resistance than before, as if someone had tested it earlier. I didn't touch anything else. I just stood there, heart steady but heavy, like I was listening for a heartbeat that wasn't mine. When Michael came out, I tried again. "You're sure no one has the spare key?" He laughed softly. "Corinne, no one wants to break into our lives. Stop worrying." He kissed the top of my head and turned away. I nodded, but my eyes stayed on the door. Later that night, as he slept, I walked back through the rooms one more time. Nothing missing. Nothing moved again. Still, the apartment felt like someone had breathed inside it while we were gone and hadn't exhaled. By Tuesday, I was waking in the middle of the night, convinced I'd heard a sound that wasn't there. The perfume smell had faded, but its absence felt louder than the scent itself. I told myself to let it go, yet every time I reached for the light switch, I paused, as if someone might already be standing there. On Wednesday evening, I sat at the kitchen table scrolling through my phone, Michael was in the den watching sports. Half listening as I said, "I think I'll get one of those small security cameras just for peace of mind." He didn't look away from the screen. "You're still on that. Someone might be coming in." "Mike, no one's breaking in." "You're making yourself crazy." "Maybe I'd rather be crazy with evidence," he sighed. "Fine. Do what you want. Just don't blame me when you start filming shadows." The next morning, while he was at work, I walked to a tech shop near Pike Street. The young clerk showed me a small, motion-activated camera, no bigger than a matchbox. "It's easy," he said, smiling. "Download the app, set alerts, and you'll see anything that moves." I nodded, though my hands trembled slightly when I paid. Back home, I set it up near the entryway shelf, angled toward the door. The blinking green light made me uneasy, so I turned it off and tested the feed on my phone. Clear picture. Silent. I left it running. That night, as I folded laundry, Michael called from the living room. "You happy now, detective?" I smiled without turning, happier than being blind. He chuckled, but it sounded forced. When I lay in bed, I kept the phone on my nightstand, the app still open. Thursday was only a few hours away. I told myself I was ready to know, though, deep down. I wasn't sure which would be worse, finding nothing at all, or finding someone I knew. Thursday came quietly. Michael left early for a client breakfast, kissing my cheek in a rush that smelled faintly of mint and sleep. I waited until the apartment door closed before glancing at the small camera light, steady, unblinking. I told myself I wouldn't check it until evening. By the time I got home, the sky had dimmed to that familiar Seattle gray that made the windows look like mirrors. I hung up my coat, poured a glass of wine, and sat at the kitchen counter with my phone. My hands weren't shaking, but my breath felt shallow. The app showed a single alert. Motion detected at 1:17 in the afternoon. I tapped play. The screen flickered, then steadied. The front door opened. A woman stepped in with quiet confidence, using a key. She paused, closing the door gently behind her. Her blonde hair was tied back, her sweater pale blue. It took only a second for recognition to sink in. Lydia. My daughter-in-law moved easily through the entryway, glancing around as if checking that the space was empty. She didn't hesitate. She walked straight toward the bedroom. The video followed her until she disappeared from frame. Then she returned holding a small white envelope. She opened my dresser drawer, placed it carefully inside, and paused. Then she took out a perfume bottle, my perfume from the dresser top. She sprayed once into the air, closed her eyes briefly, smiled, and left. The door shut softly behind her. I sat still, watching the video replay itself on the small screen. The sound of the city outside was distant, like it belonged to another world. I replayed it once more, slower this time, watching her posture, her calmness, the faint satisfaction in her expression. When Michael came home, I didn't mention it. He kissed my shoulder and talked about traffic, about dinner, about nothing at all. I nodded when he spoke, my phone still in my lap, the screen dark, but the image burned into my mind, Lydia's hand on my drawer, her smile before leaving. As he poured himself a drink, I looked at him and felt something unfamiliar settle inside me. Not fear, not yet. Something colder, something waiting. The next evening, when Michael left for a late meeting, I went straight to the bedroom. My hands felt steady, deliberate. I opened the top drawer of the dresser, the same one Lydia had touched. It was empty. The folded scarves I'd arranged days ago were slightly shifted. The edges uneven, a subtle but unmistakable sign. Their edges uneven. The envelope was gone. I checked again, slower this time, feeling the drawer's edges, sliding my fingers beneath the lining. Nothing. When Michael came home, I was sitting on the edge of the bed. He dropped his briefcase on the chair and glanced at me. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I checked the dresser. I said, He frowned. Why, there was something inside, an envelope. From who, Lydia? He let out a soft laugh. The kind meant to calm me, but landing wrong. Corinne, come on. Lydia barely has time to call, let alone sneak over here. I saw her, I said quietly. That made him pause. His smile thinned. What are you talking about? I have it on video. She used a key. Came in Thursday afternoon. He looked at me a long moment, then exhaled. You really believe this nonsense? You've been anxious for weeks. You need to stop watching that neighbor and start trusting people. Then explain why the envelope is gone. He ran a hand through his hair, the movement sharp. Maybe you imagined it. Maybe your camera glitched. You're making something out of nothing. His voice stayed even, but I saw the small pulse jump at his temple. I said nothing else. When he turned away to undress, I watched the back of his neck, the shape of his shoulders, trying to remember if he had looked this tense before Thursday. Michael fell asleep easily that night, his breathing even, unbothered. I lay beside him, eyes open to the faint light from the hallway. The air between us felt too still, like something waiting to be named. When his breathing deepened, I slipped out of bed and walked to his desk. The laptop was open, the screen dim but awake. He never logged out of anything. He never needed to. I moved slowly, not out of fear, but focus. The email window was already open. My pulse started a quiet rhythm in my ears. At the top, drafts. I clicked. There were 3 empty messages and 1 with a single line. The subject read nothing at all. The message: "We should slow down. She's starting to notice." Signed at the bottom, M. My mouth went dry. The cursor blinked as if it were still alive, waiting for him to finish the thought. I didn't gasp or cry. I just stared. The neatness of the words, the calm tone like a man discussing the weather. I read it again, slower, imagining his fingers typing it. Lydia's name wasn't there, but it didn't have to be. I reached for my phone, careful not to let it cast light across the room, and took a photo. Then another. I forwarded the draft to a private email I'd created long ago and renamed it something harmless grocery list. When I finished, I closed the laptop and wiped the keys with my sleeve. Michael shifted in bed. You still up? He murmured. I couldn't sleep, I said softly. He mumbled something, half a word, maybe my name, and turned away. I stood there for a long time, watching the rise and fall of his back. The calm in my chest didn't feel like forgiveness or grief. It felt measured, sharp, deliberate, like a door unlocking from the inside. I slipped the phone into the pocket of my robe, turned off the lamp, and went back to bed. My eyes stayed open until dawn. By the next afternoon, the shock had turned into something cold and deliberate. I called Sophie Lane, an old friend from design school who now practiced family law. Her voice over the phone was calm, low, and certain, the kind of tone I needed. We met at a cafe near the courthouse, one we used to visit years ago when our lives still felt soft around the edges. She studied my face before speaking. You don't have to tell me everything right now, she said gently. Start with what you know for sure. I told her about the video, the envelope, the email. She listened without interrupting, only tapping her pen against the notebook once. When I finished, she said, you need to protect yourself quietly. Collect everything. Don't confront him yet. People hide better when they know they're being watched. I already have the footage, I said, and the email. Good. She nodded. Check the bank accounts next. Look for transfers or withdrawals you don't recognize. If he's sharing finances with her, it will leave a trail. The word "her" sat between us like a blade. When I returned home that evening, Michael was watching television. I smiled, kissed his cheek, and asked about his day. He looked up, surprised at my ease. You seem better? He said. I am, I replied. I just needed perspective. While he showered, I went through our shared bank folder. A few recent withdrawals caught my eye, round amounts. all labeled consulting. I photographed them, each one carefully, and stored the copies beside the email photo and the footage. 2 days later, while he was at work, I called a locksmith. Old key stopped working. I lied easily. When the new lock clicked into place, a thin sense of safety returned. That night, I cooked dinner, laughed at his stories, and refilled his glass. My silence sat between us smooth, invisible, and razor sharp. Lydia called 3 days later. Her tone was soft, almost sweet. "Corinne, I'd really like us all to have dinner, just to clear the air, no tension, no gossip, family only." I could hear Michael in the background of the living room, pretending not to listen. I said yes before he could interrupt. Saturday came damp and cold. We drove in silence through the narrow streets, wipers dragging against the windshield. When we reached Evan and Lydia's townhouse, the lights were already glowing behind the curtains. Lydia opened the door wearing a cream dress, her smile perfectly measured. "Come in," she said warmly. "Evan's pouring wine." Evan hugged me first. "It's good to have everyone together again." His face was open, trusting, untouched by the tension that hung around the room. Dinner began quietly: roast chicken, polite questions, practiced laughter. Lydia talked about her classes at the community college. Michael nodded, saying little. I waited, letting the conversation settle, watching the rhythm of their comfort. Halfway through the meal, Lydia reached for her glass. Her fingers trembled just slightly when she lifted it. "See," she said lightly, "we can still enjoy a nice evening." I smiled at her, then turned to Michael. "You should have deleted that draft." The fork slipped from Lydia's hand. It hit the plate with a sound that split the room. Evan looked from me to his father. "What draft?" Michael stared at me, jaw tight. "Corinne, not now." "No," I said evenly. "Now's perfect." Lydia tried to laugh, but the sound broke halfway. "I think there's a misunderstanding. There was," I replied, "and I've corrected it." Evan's expression changed, confusion turning to unease. "Dad?" he asked. Michael didn't answer. Lydia reached for his arm, and he flinched. I folded my napkin, placed it neatly beside my plate, and stood. "Thank you for dinner," I said quietly. "Everything looks beautiful." Evan rose halfway, unsure whether to follow me. I touched his shoulder as I passed. "It's all right," I murmured. Outside, the air felt sharper, cleaner. Behind me, through the window, the light over the table flickered once and steadied again. I walked toward the car without looking back. The morning after that dinner, I called Sophie. My voice was steady. "I'm ready," I said. Within a week, she had everything organized: the footage, the emails, the bank transfers, the notarized statement from the locksmith who replaced the lock. "You don't need revenge," she told me. "You need distance and proof." By Thursday, the papers were filed. I left Michael's copy on the kitchen counter beside his coffee mug, folded neatly, each crease a marker of control regained, folded neatly in an envelope marked with his name. That evening, he came home early. The sound of the door closing was heavier than usual. "You filed," he said flatly. "Yes." He let out a laugh without humor. "You think this will make you feel better?" "Dragging our lives through lawyers." "I'm not dragging anything," I said. "I'm setting it down." He opened his mouth, then stopped. The silence between us was thick. Final. 2 days later, Sophie called. His firm asked him to retire early. They didn't want a scandal. I thanked her and hung up. By the following week, the college announced that Lydia had resigned. Sophie said the board discovered personal boundary violations with a family client. They didn't need names. They already knew enough. Evan came to see me once. He stood in the doorway like a boy again, unsure of which parent he belonged to. "Mom," he said, "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to," I replied. "Just take your time." He nodded. eyes wet but proud. I will. When he left, I stayed by the window until his car turned the corner. The apartment was quiet, filled with the faint smell of rain and clean wood. I sat down at the table, breathing slowly, realizing that silence, for the first time, didn't mean fear. It meant space. It meant room to begin again. Winter softened into a wet spring before I noticed how easily the days held me. On Thursdays, I walked to the community center on Eastlake, a low building that always smelled faintly of paper and soap. My class was small, 6 women, and 1 retired carpenter who wanted to learn how to make rooms feel warmer without buying anything new. Start with what you can move, I told them. Light habits. The way you enter a room after class. Nora lingered by the door. You look lighter these days, she said. I am? I answered. It took practice. Back home, the apartment met me without edges. I set the kettle on and watched the steam lift. It was nearly 1 in the afternoon Thursday, the hour that used to scrape. I poured coffee, carried it to the balcony, and opened the door to the thin rain. Cold air slid over my hands. Across Lake Union, the water shivered under the light. I listened for the old sounds, the click of a key, the soft intake of breath that wasn't mine, and heard only the city at arm's length. The camera was gone. I had given it to the center's front desk for their storeroom. When the clerk asked if I wanted a receipt, I shook my head. No evidence left to keep. I said, and she smiled without asking more. Around 3, Mrs. Caldwell knocked with a small loaf wrapped in a towel. Lemon, she said, setting it on the counter. I baked 2 and I live alone. We cut it while it was still warm. She chewed thoughtfully, then glanced toward the door. Quiet these days. It is, I said. She patted my wrist and left as softly as she came. Evening gathered early. As it does here, I watered the plants, wiped the table, and folded the towel she'd brought. At the balcony, I breathed in the clean smell of rain until it touched something steady inside me. I finished the coffee, rinsed the cup, and turned off the kitchen light. In the calm that followed, the rooms felt exactly like themselves. I closed the balcony door and let Thursday pass through, leaving nothing behind but air,